The wind clawed across the Texas plains like some ancient spirit unwilling to rest, sweeping dust and sleet through the huddled cluster of shacks that dared call themselves a town. A lone rider pressed forward against the storm, his horse lathered and weary, its breath steaming in the late winter air. The man astride it sat tall despite his fatigue, shoulders broad beneath a worn duster, hat brim sagging with melted flakes. His name was Elias Carter, though in most places no one asked. To strangers, he was just another drifter, a scarred figure passing through, leaving only hoof prints and silence behind. Yet inside his chest beat a heart carrying the weight of wars fought, blood spilled, and family long buried. Elias had not come to this town searching for company. The world had taken that from him years ago. He sought only warmth for the night, maybe whiskey if his last coin stretched that far, and feed for his horse. Yet as he rode down the main street, he found the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing in the center of the settlement. A crowd had gathered before the largest building, a squat ranch house converted into something of a stronghold. Shouting carried through the bitter air, rough voices laced with cruelty and the unmistakable sound of children crying. Elias slowed his horse, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. He could have kept going. God knew it would have been easier, but the sound of a child sob twisted at something deep in his gut. He dismounted, boots sinking into mud, and moved closer. On the wooden porch stood a man thick around the middle, face pocked with scars, voice booming as he shoved a woman and 6 children down into the snow. "You're finished here," he barked. "Your husband's gone, and with him your claim. This land belongs to the Hardins again. Take your brats and crawl into the wilderness, for all I care." The woman stumbled, catching her youngest against her chest. Her dress was simple, threadbare, yet she held herself with a dignity that seemed to mock the brute's rage. Her dark hair, unpinned, whipped across her face in the wind, but her eyes, tired, red from weeping, burned with defiance. Her children clung to her skates, the eldest boy barely 12, jaw set in a stubborn line, though fear trembled through his small frame. Elias recognized cruelty when he saw it. He had seen officers toss widows from their homes after the war, seen children starve while men grew rich on misery. The sight awakened old ghosts. He could have walked on, told himself it wasn't his concern. But the weight of his past pressed too heavily, and the silence he carried would not let him look away. The man, Hardin, no doubt, snatched the satchel from the porch and hurled it at the woman's feet. "Be glad I don't have you whipped for trying to cheat us. You got 1 hour before we set fire to what's left." The woman's lips parted as if to protest, but no sound came. Instead, she turned, gathering her children close, murmuring comfort as though her word could shield them from the cold and cruelty alike. Elias stepped forward then, boots thudding on wet boards. "That's far enough," Hardin barked, noticing him. "This ain't your affair, stranger. Ride on before you catch something ugly." The cowboy's eyes lifted, gray as iron beneath his hat brim. "Seems to me," he said quietly, "there's already something ugly here." The crowd shifted uneasily. They had expected no interference. Elias's hand rested on the butt of his revolver, not threatening, merely natural, as though it belonged there, as much a part of him as a scar running across his cheek. Hardin sneered. "You aiming to champion this widow, drifter? Best not. She's nothing but trouble. Her husband's dead and her claims void. She and her bastards have no place here." Elias let the silence hang. The children clung tighter to their mother, and the youngest, no more than 4, peeked at him with wide eyes shimmering with tears. That small gaze struck him harder than any insult. He remembered another child's face, his sister's boy, starved before Elias returned from war. Memory cut like a blade, and he knew he would not walk away. "How much?" Elias asked flatly. Hardin blinked. "What?" "How much to let them go in peace? You want land. Fine. You want coin. I'll pay. But you'll not hound them into the snow." The man laughed, and others joined, though uneasily. "What's she worth to you? She got 6 brats and nothing else. You got coin, stranger? Got stock to wager?" Elias loosened the strap across his shoulder and set a small leather pouch on the porch rail. It clinked faintly, his last silver and gold, saved for survival. He followed it with the reins of his horse, the beast stamping the ground, flanks heaving. "All I have," Elias said. "Enough." The crowd murmured. Hardin's eyes gleamed with greedy amusement. "You'd give your horse, your purse, for a woman you never met." Elias's voice did not rise. "I'd give it to see you leave her be." The man spat, but greed outweighed pride. He scooped up the pouch, weighed it, and jerked the reins from Elias's grasp. "Take the witch and her pups, then. But know this, when they freeze out there, their blood's on your hands." The widow's eyes widened in shock, confusion mingling with disbelief. Elias offered her a brief nod, then extended his hand. She hesitated, then placed her trembling fingers in his, as though clutching at the last rope before drowning. Hardin and his kin disappeared back inside with their spoils, and the crowd dispersed, muttering. The storm still howled, but now the widow and her children stood alone with Elias on the muddy street. "We've nowhere to go," she said softly, voice raw from swallowed tears. "No food, no shelter. You shouldn't have done that." Elias studied her, noting the pride fighting with despair in her eyes. "Couldn't stand by," he answered simply. The eldest boy stepped forward, fists clenched though his frame quivered. "Why? Why would you help us? You don't even know us." Elias crouched, meeting the boy's defiant gaze. "Because once, someone should have helped me. No one did." His words were gravel, heavy with memory, and the boy faltered, unsure how to answer. The widow gathered her children, still staring at the stranger who had given up everything for them. "My name is Clara," she said at last, voice steadier now. "These are my children, Samuel, Ruth, Daniel, Mary, Joseph, and little Anna." Elias tipped his hat slightly. Elias Carter. The storm thickened, snow mingling with the rain, urging haste. Elias glanced where his horse had stood, now gone, and felt the loss like another scar carved into him. He turned back to Clara. "We need shelter. There was nearby." "There's an abandoned trapper's shack by the creek," she murmured. "It's not far if the little ones can walk." "Then we'll make it." He lifted the smallest child into his arms, the girl clinging instinctively to his coat. The gesture surprised him with its weight, both physical and otherwise. Together, they trudged from the town, leaving behind firelight and cruelty, stepping into the wilderness with nothing but desperation and resolve. As they moved, Elias kept scanning the shadows, hand near his revolver. Hardin's greed might be sated for now, but men like that rarely let go of a grudge. The family walked close, Clara supporting one child while guiding another, her face set against the wind. She had lost nearly everything, yet she did not crumble. That quiet strength stirred respect in Elias, though he kept it hidden behind his stern gaze. When at last they reached the shack, little more than a ruin with a roof half-collapsed, Elias forced the door open with a grunt. Inside smelled of mildew and has long gone cold, but it offered walls against the storm. He set the youngest down gently, then coaxed a flame from his flint, the fire growing weakly but enough to bring color back to the children's cheeks. As warmth spread, silence filled the space. Clara's eyes reflected the firelight, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Elias leaned back against the wall, hat shadowing his features. For a moment, he considered leaving them come morning, heading east, finding another horse, disappearing as always. But then the youngest girl, Anna, crawled into his lap without a word, resting her head against his chest. Elias froze, heart pounding with fear different from battle. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he wrapped his arm around her, the weight of her trust heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Clara watched, lips parting as though to speak, but no words came. In that silence, Elias knew the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm within. He had stepped into a fight that was no longer just about survival. It was about ghosts, about choices, about the chance to protect what he thought he had lost forever. The fire popped, the wind moaned through cracks, and Elias stared into the flames, haunted eyes seeing not just the past, but the uncertain road ahead. The morning after the storm found the shack creaking under the weight of frost, its timbers groaning like an old man resisting the day. Elias Carter rose before the children stirred, his body stiff from the floorboards and his mind clouded with a kind of dreams he never spoke aloud. He stepped outside, boots sinking into crusted snow, breath curling into the gray air. The world was hushed, broken only by the trickle of water from a creek where ice had begun to melt. He scanned the tree line, Senses alert, the soldier in him always expecting an ambush even when none came. Inside, Clara roused her children with soft words, coaxing them from their blankets of burlap and faded cloth. Their cheeks were pale, lips tinged with blue, but their eyes followed her as if a calm alone could ward off hunger and fear. She moved with quiet determination, gathering sticks of the fire, mending torn sleeves with fingers red from cold. Elias watched from the doorway, struck by her resilience. She was no fragile widow begging for mercy. She was steel wrapped in gentleness, and that strength unsettled him more than any storm. By midday, Elias returned from a short hunt, a pair of scrawny rabbits dangling from his hand. The children's eyes widened at the sight, and for a moment, the cabin filled with laughter as Clara cooked the meager catch, stretching it into a stew so thin it barely coated the spoon. Elias said nothing of the hunger gnawing at his own belly. He had known worse. But when the youngest, Anna, reached for his bowl with small fingers, he surrendered it without thought, the gesture earning him a fleeting smile from Clara that warmed the room more than the fire. The days blurred together, each marked by the struggle to keep warm, to find food, to hold despair at bay. Elias taught Samuel, the eldest boy, how to set snares along the creek. He showed Ruth how to dry kindling inside her coat, to shield it from the snow. He sharpened sticks into crude spears for Daniel and Joseph, telling them it was not play but practice, because wolves did not care for innocence. The children began to orbit him like wary satellites, their fear giving way to something heavier, dependence. Elias felt the weight of it pressing against the walls he had built inside. At night, when the little ones slept huddled together, Clara and Elias spoke in low voices. She told him of her late husband, a man who had once been kind but weak, crushed beneath the iron will of his family. She spoke of the Hardins' cruelty, of how they had treated her like a servant even while her husband lived, and how his death gave them excuse to cast her out entirely. Elias listened, though he offered little in return. When she asked about his past, he deflected with silence, only his eyes betraying the shadows that lived there. One evening, as wind howled through the trees, Elias heard movement outside. He slipped from the shack, revolver drawn, and found tracks circling the perimeter. Human, not animal. Someone had been watching. He followed the trail into the woods, every muscle tense, until he caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the moonlight, a tall man with hair bound in braids, a bow in his hand, eyes sharp as flint. They stared at each other across the clearing, two predators measuring intent. Elias raised his revolver slightly, but the stranger did not flinch. Instead, he lowered his bow with deliberate calm, as if declaring this was no ambush. Then, without a word, he melted back into the trees, leaving only silence behind. Elias returned to the cabin, unsettled. He told Clara nothing, but the thought of unseen eyes lingered with him into the small hours of the night. The next day, Samuel stumbled into the shack with a torn sleeve and panic in his eyes. "Wolves," he gasped, "down by the creek." Elias grabbed his rifle and sprinted into the snow, Samuel close behind. 3 gray shapes circled the boy's snare, hackles raised, teeth bared. Elias took aim, but before he could fire, an arrow whistled past, striking one wolf cleanly inside. The beast yelped and collapsed. The other 2 snarled, but Elias's rifle cracked, sending them scattering into the brush. From the trees emerged the same stranger, tall, lean, face carved with quiet intensity. He carried himself with the assurance of someone who belonged to the land in a way Elias never could. Elias kept his rifle ready, but the man showed no hostility. Instead, he retrieved his arrow, wiped it clean, and regarded Elias with cool detachment. Samuel's eyes were wide. "He saved us," the boy whispered. The man spoke at last, his voice low and measured. "This land is not safe. You make too much noise, too much smoke. Others will come." His English was accented but clear. Elias stuttered him. "You been watching us?" The man did not deny it. "I watch all who trespass. Some I chase away, some I let be. You—" He paused, gaze shifting to Samuel, then back to Elias. "You fight for them." Elias lowered his rifle slightly. "We didn't come to trespass, just to survive." The stranger nodded once, then turned as if to leave. Samuel blurted, "Wait! What's your name?" A flicker of surprise crossed the man's face. "Town," he said, before disappearing into the woods as silently as he had come. That night, Clara listened as Samuel breathlessly recounted the encounter. The children whispered about the mysterious warrior, half in fear, half in awe. Clara's expression remained unreadable, though Elias saw a spark of hope in her eyes she did not voice. He said nothing, but privately, he wondered if fate had placed the man in their path for a reason. Days stretched into weeks. The winter eased, but survival remained precarious. Elias hunted. Town appeared at intervals, sometimes with meat, sometimes with herbs for fevers, and then vanished without explanation. Trust did not come easily. Elias kept his hand close to his revolver whenever the man approached. Yet slowly, grudgingly, a bond formed. They fought together when wolves came again. Back to back in the snow, Elias's bullets and Town's arrows striking with deadly rhythm. When the danger passed, no words were exchanged, but respect was carved into the silence. Clara noticed a change. She saw Elias speak more to the children, saw Samuel shadow him eagerly, saw little Anna cling to him as if he were already part of their blood. One night, as the children slept, Ruth whispered shyly to Elias, "Please, marry our mother, then we'd be safe." The word struck him like a hammer. He froze, unable to answer, his chest tightening with emotions he had buried too long. Clara overheard, her cheeks coloring, but she said nothing, only met Elias's eyes with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Elias lay awake long after, staring at the rafters, haunted by the plea. He remembered holding a woman once, promising her safety he had failed to deliver. He remembered the graves he had left behind. Could he bear that weight again? Could he let them depend on him, knowing what shadows followed? The next morning he rose early, walking to the creek alone. Frost still clung to the banks, and mist curled from the water. He thought of leaving, of sparing them the disappointment of his inevitable failure. Yet as he stood there, he heard laughter behind him, Anna chasing Joseph, Clara smiling faintly as she watched. That simple sound cut deeper than any blade. He realized then that leaving would not protect them. It would only doom them. When Town appeared again, Elias asked without preamble, "Why help us?" The man considered, "Because you do not turn away from the weak. Many white men take. You give. That is rare." Elias met his gaze. "And what do you want?" Town shrugged lightly. "Perhaps nothing. Perhaps to see if you can endure." The words lingered as they worked side by side to repair the shack, strengthening the roof, building traps again. The children watched, learning without instruction. Clara tended the fire, her quiet presence binding them all together like thread. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the snow in shades of blood and gold, Clara approached Elias. Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Whatever happens next, you should know you've given them more than food and shelter. You've given them hope, and that is something no man has ever done for us." Elias said nothing, but his throat tightened, and he turned away before she could see the storm in his eyes. The world outside their fragile haven was not blind. Hardin's men had begun to ask questions, to wonder how a penniless widow and her brood had vanished without trace. Tracks lingered in the snow, whispers carried on the wind. Elias knew it was only a matter of time before danger came knocking again. Yet for the first time in years, he felt something more than dread. He felt the stirrings of purpose, drawn not from duty or war, but from the fragile bond of family that had asked nothing of him except to stay. And in the shadows of the tree line, Tahan watched, silent as always, as though waiting for the reckoning that was sure to come. The thaw came slowly, dripping from the pines in thin rivulets, softening the snowpack into mud that clung to boots and hams. For weeks, Elias Carter had lived with the widow Clara and her 6 children in the ruined shack by the creek, binding their fragile survival with hard work, silence, and the occasional visit of the watchful ally named Town. Yet the world beyond their narrow circle had not forgotten them. Men like Hardin did not let go of slights. They wore grudges the way other men wore spurs. Elias felt it before he saw it. The unease in the air, the way the crows startled at nothing, the faint sense of eyes that lingered too long at the edge of the woods. He began sleeping lighter, revolver under hand, rifle propped close. Clara sensed it too, though she said nothing. Instead, she moved with more urgency, stockpiling dried roots and berries, tightening the stitching on the children's coats, as though preparing for the inevitable. The children, sensing the tension, grew quieter, their laughter dimmed. It was as though the very air held its breath. One morning, Samuel returned from checking snares with a face pale as bone. "Riders," he whispered. "On the ridge. I counted 6. Maybe more." Elias's jaw tightened. The Hardins had found their trail. He had known it was only a matter of time. "Pack what you can carry," he told Clara. "We move by sundown." She obeyed without question, though fear glimmered in her eyes. Ruth clutched Anna close, while the boys stuffed what little food they had into sacks. Elias stepped outside, scanning the ridge through a curtain of mist. Shapes moved against the sky, dark on dark, patient as wolves. He knew their kind. They would circle, wait, drive fear deeper until it broke the spirit of their prey. That night, as the children huddled in sleep, Elias sat by the fire sharpening his knife. Clara watched him, her voice low. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," he answered. "Not while they think they own you. Not while they think you're theirs to cast aside." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached across the space between them, her hand brushing his sleeve. "Then we have to fight." The admission surprised him. She was no warrior, yet her eyes held the same steel he had glimpsed the night of their first meeting. Elias nodded once. "Then we'll fight." At dawn, Town appeared like a shadow breaking free from the trees. His gaze swept the hasty packs, the fear in the children's faces. "They come," he said simply. Elias stood, rifle in hand. "How many?" 10 riders. Maybe more. Men who think themselves strong." Clara's breath caught, but Tahan's calm steadied her. Elias weighed the odds. 10 against 1 man and a bow. It was suicide. But then his eyes fell on Clara's children, their faces pale but trusting. He had walked away from too much in his life. "Not this. We'll meet them in the canyon," Elias decided. "Narrow ground. Their numbers won't matter." So they moved, trudging through mud and brush until the walls of stone rose on either side, tall and jagged, hemming them in. Clara and the children huddled in a crevice, hidden from view, while Elias and Tahan took position at the mouth of the canyon. The morning sun cut sharp shadows across the rocks, and the silence stretched thin, brittle as glass. Hoofbeats came first, echoing against stone, steady and arrogant. Then the riders appeared, Hardin at their head, his mouth twisted in a cruel smile. "Carter," he drawled, "I should have known. Always some fool thinks he can play hero." Elias stepped forward, rifle leveled, voice steady. "Turn back, Hardin. There's nothing for you here." Hardin spat, laughter rough. "Everything here is mine. That woman, those brats, they belong to me. And you gave me a horse and coin once. Now I'll take the rest." The riders fanned out, revolvers gleaming. Elias felt Tahan's presence at his side, silent as a bowstring drawn to the air. The world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. The first shot cracked the air, and chaos erupted. Elias's rifle thundered, dropping a man from his saddle. Arrows hissed beside him, swift and unerring, striking another in the throat. Horses screamed, rearing, hooves striking sparks from stone. Gunfire echoed like thunderclaps trapped in the canyon. Elias moved like a man possessed, firing, reloading, rolling behind rocks as bullets spat chips of stone around him. Pain seared across his shoulder where a shot grazed him, but he fought through it, teeth clenched. Beside him, Tahan loosed arrows with deadly calm, each shot purposeful, each strike a lesson in precision. Hardin bellowed orders, rage twisting his face as his men fell one by one. He spurred forward, revolver raised, eyes locked on Elias. The two collided in a storm of fists and steel, rifle cast aside, knives flashing in the sun. They grappled in the date, breath ragged, the struggle primal and vicious. Hardin's blade carved a shallow line across Elias's ribs, but Elias drove his fist into the man's jaw, staggering him back. The fight raged around them, men shouting, horses bolting, arrows and bullets tearing through dust. But in that moment, it was only Elias and Hardin, locked in the reckoning neither could escape. Hardin lunged again, knife aimed for Elias's heart, but Elias twisted, seizing the man's wrist, forcing the blade down. With a surge of fury and memory, of graves, of battles, of children crying, Elias turned the knife and drove it into Hardin's chest. The man's eyes went wide, disbelief scrawled across his face. He gurgled once, then collapsed into the dirt, lifeless. Silence followed, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the ragged breathing of survivors. The canyon stank of blood and gunpowder. Elias staggered, blood soaking his shirt, strength wavering. Tahan caught his arm, steadying him, eyes dark with unspoken respect. "It is done," he said simply. Clara emerged from the crevice, children clustering around her skirts, eyes wide with terror and awe. She ran to Elias, hands trembling as she touched the wound at his side. "You're hurt." "I'll live," he muttered, though the weight pressing on him said otherwise. The children clung to him then, Samuel gripping his arm, Ruth sobbing into his coat, Anna wrapping small arms around his leg. "Please don't leave us," she whispered, her words cutting deeper than any blade. Elias looked at Clara. Her eyes glistened, but she held herself tall, strength in her bearing even as fear warred within. The children's plea hung heavy in the air, words they had spoken before but never with such raw desperation. "Marry our mother. Make us safe. Stay." His throat tightened. He could not speak promises he feared to break. He had buried too many, lost too much, to swear he could protect them from all the world's cruelty. Yet as he looked at their faces, innocent, bruised, still shining with fragile hope, he knew one truth. He would not abandon them. "I can't give you vows," he said hoarsely, voice raw from battle. "But I can give you this. I'll stay. I'll fight for you. As long as I draw breath, you won't stand alone." Clara's lips trembled, a tear spilling down her cheek, but she nodded, acceptance and gratitude mingling with sorrow. The children pressed closer, comforted not by the word marriage, but by the certainty in his voice. They buried the dead in the canyon, leaving unmarked mounds of stone where greed had fallen to dust. When it was done, the sun dipped low, painting the sky with fire. Elias stood with Clara and the children, Tahan at his side, silent as ever. The future stretched before them, uncertain and fraught, but no longer empty. As they began the long walk back to the shack, Elias felt the weight of his ghost lift slightly, replaced by a burden he chose to bear. He had not found redemption in war, nor in wandering, but perhaps he might find it here, in the fragile trust of a family who had asked him only to stay. The wind rose, carrying the scent of pine and smoke, the sound of children's laughter threading faintly through the dusk. Elias walked on, scarred but unbroken, a haunted man no longer drifting alone, but bound at last to something greater than himself. And in the fading light, the promise of tomorrow shimmered like dawn breaking over the wilderness, uncertain, imperfect, but alive.